Welcome, everybody. Today we're working on Unit 2. This unit will introduce us to spreadsheets and Microsoft Excel. We do have the precursor to this unit, or the expectation, basically, that you were able to install Excel by going to the Office 365 site through your gateway login. And we are not going to be using Excel in the browser, although a lot of the stuff we'll do today will work just fine in the browser. I really strongly prefer that you use an installed version of Excel. So if you don't have Excel installed, that should be at the top of your priority list for this class, that you have the installed version. The reason we want you to use the installed version is it is significantly more powerful than the browser-based version. The browser-based version is getting a lot better, but it does lack some of the core functionality that we'll use, especially for advanced features. Whenever you use a browser online to do Excel, there can sometimes be little lags and hiccups in processing, depending on the level of service that you have. Because we are relying on some data center somewhere to run the stuff in the background, and who knows how busy they are. When you have it on your local machine, the data's on your local machine, you have a lot more control of it, and you really get the whole Excel experience. So make sure you have the product installed. If you don't, for now, I'm okay with the fact that you would log into Excel in the fashion that I'm going to just bring up on screen here really quickly. So if you go into that Office 365 icon in My Gateway, they land you in Copilot. I don't know why they trying to push you to use the AI agent. What I prefer that you do is you just come down here, click on the apps icon. Normally, I like to go here before I launch anything, partially to show you all the other products that are available inside here that you might not even know are part of Microsoft Office. Some of them are online only, but a lot of them, are really better, on your local platform. The primary Office products are the ones that are up at the top. Word, Excel, and PowerPoint are the preeminent three. The Office suite also includes Microsoft Outlook, which is an email program, OneDrive, which was your online storage. And yes, you do have some OneDrive space that you can use here. It's not as much as your Google Drive space. So I would caution you in saving stuff there, because you might go, oh, I think I put it on my Google Drive. Oh, no, it's on my OneDrive. And then you kind of lose it, right? So I try to stick with the one platform or the other. And I think you guys get more storage on Google Drive than you do on OneDrive. So keep that in mind. Teams is the product that they use for doing what we're doing now, which is Teams is like the Microsoft equivalent of Zoom with some extra features built in. Not a huge fan, but a lot of big organizations do use it as their primary video conferencing platform and collaboration mechanism. There's Clipchamp, which is a video editing tool, and SharePoint, which is a whole different platform unto itself. OneNote is a really kind of neat note-taking product if you've never explored it. All of that stuff is available for free. By the way, you can use any of it. But remember, if you're going to install, you install through this icon here. If you don't have it installed, you might want to click that icon and start installing it maybe while we're doing the session and I'm lecturing. You can get the product in. But if need be, you can do some of the work today in this platform. Often what will happen is if you work in this platform and then you go to do a power feature that isn't available, they'll have a little button at the top of the Excel window or the browser window that says launch in Excel, if it recognizes you have Excel in your system. And often that happens. And if you think about this, if you're out on the road somewhere and you're using a computer and you can get logged into your Office 365 and you can get in here and you can do a basic spreadsheet, that's kind of helpful, for sure. If you want to create a workbook inside of here, you just go ahead and click that create blank workbook. It'll launch inside the browser, and most of the typical Excel features will be there. I do find it a little more cumbersome. You see all the steps you have to go through just to get it to launch, right? But once you're in, generally speaking, it's a very, very similar product, although lacking some of the features. One of the good features about working in this platform is it does have the share option. So like if you guys have ever done this in Google Docs or Google Sheets, where you can share a document live and have multiple people editing at the same time, that's one reason why you might want to use the browser-based version. However, the installed version does the same thing if you're familiar with all the login mechanisms and how to connect it up. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close the browser-based version, but I just want to make you guys aware of the fact that it's there. So when we get into doing the work, that you have something to work on. If you want to hustle to install it, now is not a bad time to like do it as I'm kind of droning on about the material that we're covering. All right, let's look at this first entry that I have here in Unit 2, which is basically kind of a look back at, like, first of all, like, what is a spreadsheet? Where do they come from? Is Excel the first spreadsheet product that was ever created? And that is not the case, by the way. All right, so let's talk about spreadsheets as a concept of really, I would refer to it as a data structure in a sense, right? And those of you that are taking a programming class right now, and that's many of you are maybe doing Python, or maybe you already had Python. One thing that you start to discover when you start working with programming is one aspect of programming is like the logic that you create to run a program, but then there's also the data that you're dealing with, the information that either a user is providing or that you're extracting from some source. Maybe you're pulling it out of a database. Maybe somebody has information compiled somewhere. Maybe it's written and you need to convert it to electronic format, all of that. A spreadsheet basically is a document. So like the first thing I would caution you to, don't think of it as like a database, although in a way it kind of is. It really truly is a document that just has a lot of little spots to put information, as opposed to a regular document where it's all in one large container. The advantage of being able to take information and put it into what we call a tabular format, rows and columns of information, is that it's really easy to organize it, right? So if you are like one of those people that likes to make lists, maybe you make a grocery list, or you have a to-do list, or whatever it is, right? Spreadsheets often work really well for people who think in that fashion, right? So like when you start thinking about how do I organize my information, and you find yourself making columns naturally, or maybe you're into sports or something, and you're keeping track of scores or something like that. So if you find yourself naturally doing that, you were built to use spreadsheets, totally. What's nice about a spreadsheet is you can use it to do stuff with your information aside from just store it, right? So normally when we throw stuff into like a text document, often what happens is it all just gets thrown in there and it's not really organized, and it's just in there. You can't really utilize it necessarily to do other higher level work. When it lands in a spreadsheet, though, now you have a completely different set of capabilities available to you. And really what happens is you can write formulas, you can do math, you can even add programming code. You can use the data to drive visualizations or dashboards, or create all sorts of really interesting and useful things. The power of Excel, in my mind, really lies with the fact that you can combine information and numbers and basically instructions or formulas, and have it do some pretty intensive things. Excel is a product that likes to use references to information as opposed to sometimes hard coding the information. And the way that I would kind of explain that is sometimes you can put a piece of information in one little box and then write a formula in a different box that utilizes that information, right? And we don't hard code the information into the cell. We refer to the information that's in the different cell. And that way, if you have, let's say, 20 cells that refer to the same data point, you can change that one data point and the whole spreadsheet will update at once, right? And that's one of the powers of Excel. All right, so we organize things in rows and columns. In some cases, we can just put words in there. It doesn't have to be numbers, right? So a lot of people think that when you're working with Excel, it has to be all numbers. That's not the case at all. It can be words also that you're putting in there. It can be URLs. It can be actually other more complex data types that you throw in there. Generally, it's words and numbers. That's what most spreadsheets are made of. And the other thing that you can use Excel for is to take information that is complex and format it in a pleasing way so it looks nice either on the screen or printed to paper or as part of a PowerPoint slideshow or something like that, right? It's organized, it's might be colorful, you know, the information that's bolded or highlighted might be easy to recognize because you can do that like you can do in a word processor. All right, so let me bring Excel up on the screen here, and I'm gonna, well, actually, let me get rid of this, just minimize that. But I'm gonna pull Excel up on the screen just to have it as a point of reference to talk about. I'm launching my local version here, and I'm just gonna go ahead and create a blank workbook. I'm gonna do some rudimentary examples, but mostly, at least initially, I'm gonna talk about the interface and how it lays out and how to utilize the product. And one thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to flip into this mode here because basically since, oh gosh, maybe about 15 years ago, they introduced this interface here called the ribbon bar. And by default, that's typically on. So I will talk about that versus the menus and then all the little side components that kind of drive Excel. All right. So rows and columns, and when you open up a spreadsheet, a blank one like this, you'll notice that there's tabs at the bottom, right? And it is possible to add tabs, and there's a little plus mark here, right? You can click that, and now I have 2 tabs, and each one can hold separate pieces of information. I know that seems kind of rudimentary for some of you, but in principle, that's really a powerful thing because I can have many, many tables of information all inside of one spreadsheet or what they call a workbook, truly. Google Sheets operates in much the same way, so they have multiple tabs for theirs as well. I'm not sure if there's a functional limit to how many tabs you can have, but I know it's many. It might be hundreds or thousands, might be the limit. You'll notice that all the cells that are on this spreadsheet are basically I'll have a designation is a good way to put it, I guess. Right now, as I start this spreadsheet, you'll notice that the top leftmost cell A1 is highlighted, and you'll notice right above it here in the ribbon bar, it shows me where my cursor is currently located. So I'm going to use the arrow key on my keyboard, so the up, down, left, right keys. And you can navigate around the product. And you notice that little box right here as I move around will change. And basically the purpose of that box is, where's my cursor now? And right now I'm in cell A1. So although we don't have anything in here, it is possible that you get spreadsheets that have many columns and many rows. Usually you'll have more rows than columns, but I've seen spreadsheets with 100,000 rows in them, right? And then if you lose your cursor, having that little box to tell you where it's at is actually pretty helpful, right? So that's one of the reasons why it's there. Is there a functional limit to how many rows and columns? And once again, the answer is I know there's a limitation, but it's absolutely huge. I don't know what it is. Somebody could probably Google it and report back. Now, if you notice as I scroll to the right, all the columns have letters. And what happens when we get past the letter Z? Well, they just start over. Now they use a 2-letter combo, AA, AB, AC, etc. And then all the rows are numbered. You can see that in the sidebar here. And it can go on for a really, really long time. Now, this is a blank workbook, and I'm not sure how far I could scroll before it would cap out, but it is a really large number. So rows and columns, we refer to them typically column and then row. So when I say A1, A is the column, 1 is the row. And we don't often use those references when we talk about the data in the spreadsheet, but when you're writing formulas, it is really pretty critical because when you're writing a formula, you might be looking at a piece of data in one cell, and instead of hard coding the value of that data, you put in the reference to the cell in the form of the A1, so letter first and column name first and row number second. And that's how we refer to spots on the spreadsheet. And until you like really dig in with formulas, you'll see that there is really kind of a crazy amount of stuff that you do just by virtue of referencing other cells. Armando threw in the chat, and thank you, Armando. Max rows is 1,048,576. Columns is 16,384. So you can see that's pretty large, right? And I wonder what they do if they need more than 1 million entries. They just make another tab, probably. I'm not sure how they overcome it, right? There's also pivot tables and things like that. So those are the functional limitations, and thank you for looking that up. All right, let's go back to the notes here. All right, so each intersection is a cell. So like I pointed out, A1, you can put text in there, numbers, formulas, or functions, right? And most typically we put in words and numbers, and then often we'll write a function to go inside there. And functions, formulas, kind of a potato, right? A formula would be like just doing basic addition, for example, where a function might have some logic behind it, kind of like programming. So like having a little bit of programming knowledge as you move forward using Excel actually becomes pretty powerful. It is also possible to write programming code. In the past, we used to do that with Visual Basic Script, and they've now transitioned that to other scripting languages. And my understanding is now you can, I think, use Python inside of here. So that's kind of exciting. Common spreadsheet products. Microsoft Excel is the preeminent one, Google Sheets, and then you move to all the open office, free office products that are out there. LibreOffice might be one of the bigger ones. If you're on a Mac platform, there's also a product called Numbers, which is it's actually a pretty darn good spreadsheet. It's still not quite as good as Excel. And a lot of Mac people never load Microsoft Office, by the way, but you should for this class. Where did it all come from? Well, this is kind of interesting because the thought is like when did Microsoft Office come out? That's when spreadsheets started, and that's actually not the case. The first product that came out was a product called VisiCalc back in 1979. It was the very first spreadsheet product. It allowed us to do most of the basic stuff that we're going to pretty much learn today, which is to get numbers in there, get some formulas and sums and averages and things like that calculated. By the early 80s, another product came out which kind of superseded VisiCalc, at least in the business world, a product called Lotus 123. That was probably the first product that really got heavily adopted by business users, mostly on the IBM PC platform, right? So people running the old DOS operating system, working on 8088s and 8086s and really old primitive personal computer platforms. Lotus 3 had the ability to do charting. It also had the ability to do much more advanced calculations. So people that were working in like fields like engineering and science and data analysis and things of that nature started using the product as kind of a really fancy calculator, right? So that's one aspect of Excel that's, or spreadsheets that's important, is its ability to crunch numbers, often automatically and very easily, right? And this is one of the reasons why we use it. By the mid 80s, Excel got introduced. It became popular because it was a graphical piece of software, right? It didn't, Lotus 123 and VisiCalc operated on DOS. So you'd have to be in a DOS environment to use those. And Excel kind of came about as Windows was being introduced. For most people using Microsoft Windows, they really weren't familiar with that OS probably until the 90s. It was not popular. And therefore, Excel really wasn't popular, real frankly, until roughly the mid 90s, is really when it kind of took over. Very interestingly, when I first entered the world of working in IT, I worked for a guy whose previous career was as an engineer. So he was the dean of our school, and he loved Lotus 123, right? And so much so that he would compose his correspondence and his letters and his documents inside of it. And I know that sounds really goofy to do, but it is possible to actually compose text documents inside of a spreadsheet. I wouldn't recommend it, but hey, whatever, you can do it. What's happened since then is basically since the mid 90s and graphical operating systems. So like when Windows 95 kind of hit the scene and Microsoft Office started to supersede old Office suites like Word Perfect and Word Star, um, and people started using Word, Excel, and PowerPoint as their office software. Excel quickly came into prominence. And Excel was one of those products that when people started to realize that we could do all the stuff that we could do in those old spreadsheets, but now we can do it in a graphical environment. It's integrated with Microsoft Office. I can share my charts and graphs between the Office products. It really took off. It blossomed heavily as we got into the 2000s. So the 2000s, it really kind of exploded. They could deal with super large data sets. They had scripting languages that sat behind the scenes. They added these powerful tools. Some of them we'll learn about here in this course, like pivot tables, Power Query, and Power Pivot. Power Query and Power Pivot are relatively new things, but pivot tables have been around a long time. And it really allowed us like different ways to work with our data and to come up with kind of integrations to things that in the past were difficult to integrate with. So for example, if I had a bunch of data in a database and then I wanted to get it into a spreadsheet, that was kind of a process in years past. Now it is possible using the tools built into Excel to tap directly into data sources. So if you have let's say credentials for a database system that stores a bunch of information, you can actually connect to that database, in essence, log into it through Excel, run a query, pull the data, feed it into your spreadsheet. And then if the data changes in the database, it updates your spreadsheet as well. Crazy powerful and really cool, actually, when you think about it. So it works really, really well with external data sources. If you're using cloud-based versions of Excel and you have tap-ins to, cloud platforms where there's data stored and whatever, you can do some really interesting things. Microsoft has a whole ecosystem of what they call their power apps that Excel can tap into. And often Excel becomes more of a source for those power apps than it becomes a receiver of those power apps. But if you have a bunch of data in Excel, you can use it to drive applications out on the web and run them through the cloud and push them to people's devices. Really pretty powerful stuff. And, it says their key takeaway: spreadsheets evolve from being simple calculators into powerful data analysis tools. And that's absolutely true. All right. So why are the spreadsheets important? Well, they're used everywhere that people really kind of do business and have information, right? So they note business, healthcare, engineering, finance, and education, right? And let's not forget, data analysis is kind of the field that we're studying. And then, as we'll learn in our AI class later tonight, that data is really the fuel for AI. Without data, AI really doesn't exist, right? And can't be generated. Really kind of easy to learn initially, so it doesn't take much to get into a spreadsheet, enter information. But as you will discover, there is kind of like almost a lifetime of learning that you can do just within that product, right? And it always blows me away that I've used it for so long and I still find new things to do with it, or new techniques, or new tools that they're adding. It is hyper flexible. You can do a lot of different things with it, things you might not even imagine. In my programming classes, so like any of you that are taking Python with me or maybe Java with me, when I try to validate formulas that we're typing into a programming language, I often use Excel to verify the data or to show what maybe an array or a list or other complex data structure looks like. And they say here it acts as a bridge between raw data and advanced analytics tools, and that's absolutely true. One of the things that's happened with Excel is there's been products that have been added to the Office suite, most notably Power BI, which is a data visualization platform. And although that's a standalone product and often uses Excel as its data feed, a lot of those capabilities are actually also built in to Excel itself. So you can do some of those crazy powerful visualizations right inside the product. All right. So let's talk about how we actually use spreadsheets. So like just getting data recorded is a really big one. And that sounds really goofy, but like if you're like finding yourself writing things down on a list, or a piece of paper to keep track of things, um, why not type it into a spreadsheet and save it and put it in the cloud somewhere so you can find it? So storing information and grabbing information is big. So data entry and record keeping. A lot of people use Excel to do things like budgeting and financial modeling, right? Tracking inventory, schedules and performance. People do all sorts of crazy stuff like that. People make calendars in Excel. People like I publish my class schedules and office hours by putting an Excel spreadsheet together because visually it's easier to do it there than try to use some other kind of program. So even if you're just trying to create something to print to paper that's orderly and has columns, Excel's a really good product to do it in. Finally, it has a lot of like features built into it, the charts, the graphs, summarization tools, built-in formulas and stuff that allow you to create information and visualize it in ways that people can use it to do decision making. Excel does have the capability, and we're going to look at some of these different features here more granularly as we move forward, but the ability, for example, to write a formula. And in other words, and here is a really, really basic one that you can see there. And what they're really doing here is, we'll get into the anatomy of a formula soon, but a formula in Excel typically starts with an equal sign. That's kind of weird, right? And then instead of adding numbers together, we're adding cell references together. So really what this would do is it would look in cell A1, retrieve the data, and then add it to whatever is in cell B1, right? And then whatever the result of that is would appear inside the cell, right? So this is kind of the basic aspect of it. There are some really common functions that we use in Excel, and this is a very quick little list of them. Sum and average are very, very common, right? So you want to total some numbers, or you want to find the average of some numbers, or you want to display data if certain conditions are true. That would be an if statement. And then we can also have tables where we fill them with information, and then we run what we call either a V lookup or an X lookup or a horizontal lookup, typically a H lookup, that allows you to find a piece of information related to another one, so it can look things up for you too, kind of like an index guide or something. Charts and graphs, so that we can create many different types of visualizations like pie charts, bar charts, line graphs, line plots, and a bunch of others, right? Some of it very automatically, all you have to do is give it the data and then you can tweak the visualizations. Everything is in rows and columns and tables. And as that little bullet indicates there, we're dealing with structured information. So tables for structured data. And then we have pivot tables, which can take complex tables and then basically break out portions of the information for summaries. Okay, so relative to data analytics, the way that we use spreadsheets is often, first of all, to collect the information. So you might be importing the information from another electronic system, very, very common. Often that data might be another spreadsheet, or it could be like a CSV file or a JSON file or whatever. Lots of different ways to bring data in. Um, we use Excel to look at the information we have and clean it. Okay, so sometimes people enter information into electronic systems and like, oh, I screwed that one up. I'll just do it again. So you might have a duplicate, or they might not have completely typed it in correctly, or some of the values they should have entered are missing. Right. So that's what we call cleaning data. We also transform the data. So we change it, we organize it, we sort, filter, group it together, calculate things from it, and turn it into more useful information. Then we can analyze the information. You do that a number of different ways. You know, they indicate here formulas, statistics, excuse me, pivot tables. All of those are used to analyze data. We can create visuals, and then, you know, once you have the information, you know, transform, cleaned, you know, create visuals with it, then you can use it to communicate ideas to people. And often, you know, when you look at a raw information, often it is very meaningless. It is the organizing of the information that gives it meaning. Throw a visualization in there, you know, it shows like increased sales or more pandemic deaths or, you know, whatever it is, that is very impactful. And therefore, you know, reports and stuff that are generated by Excel are often become very, very important uh, in terms of decision making in organizations. Organizations like to look at data to make decisions. They don't just go, okay, I think we'll just raise the prices. You know, they're going to have some reason to, you know, they're probably going to look at their costs and go, oh, our costs are going up. So therefore, our margins are getting smaller, our profits are getting smaller. So let's raise the price, right? And they have data to show it, and you know, and visuals often to show it. Um, all right, so now they talk about the strengths and limitations of spreadsheets. So they say here, easy to use, widely available, very true. And Microsoft Office and the Google app platform where you can get Google Sheets are basically free, right? So you can use free versions of those without paying anything. I think in that regard, Google is maybe a little bit better to get free access. You just establish an account with either Microsoft or Google, and then you get access to those tools. It's when you try to do more powerful things that they charge you. Google does not charge anything for their products. What they do charge you for is storage, though. So, um, you know, so we do have that available as well. And they're visual, they're interactive, great for small to medium-sized data sets. Now, of course, that begs the question: what happens if I have a ginormous, absolutely huge data set? Well, then we start using different approaches, right? Then we typically, what happens is we leave the data in the raw form and then use programming code or other advanced tools to process it. There are some limitations, right? If you don't put stuff together well, like if you don't design your spreadsheet well, you can have errors. Like if your formulas are wrong or your cell references don't point to the right spots, yeah, they can be error prone. So there's the human factor is involved. It says not ideal for very large or real-time data sets. They can be used in those capacities, but if you have a data set that's got like, I don't know, a million data points and the data is transforming every few seconds, Excel is really not the correct tool for it, right? And limited collaboration compared to databases. So databases in some ways are still superior, especially for the volume of data they can store and how people can access it. Where on a spreadsheet, if the spreadsheet's locked up on your own machine, who else is going to see it? Right? You see the challenge there. And databases typically allow for multiple users to access data at the same time. All right, so we have a bunch of stuff that currently is the way spreadsheets are, but where are they moving to in the future? A lot more automation, I think, is going to happen, and you know they use the term macros, and macros are basically programming code that's behind the scenes of a spreadsheet, right? And you know, that is usually done, by the way, like you write programming code for a spreadsheet when the spreadsheet itself is not capable of doing some sort of business logic or, you know, action that isn't built into it. I will tell you though that some of the new functionality they've added recently, including Lambda functions, most notably, kind of might make macros a little less useful. But we also have Power Automate, and we can write scripts. And as I mentioned before, I think they're integrating Python capability into it now. And now that they're also adding AI, which you see in bullet number 2 there, it's going to blow things open a little bit. So you might be able to do things like just ask it a question and it will put together the stuff you need to make it happen, right? So if you don't know how to write the formula, your AI can help you out. There's a lot of capability in the cloud-based versions. As I mentioned, even the installed version has a share button, and provided that you can get other users in your domain space, and that gets a little bit tricky. Like usually within a workplace is typically where you find that. You can get multiple people working on a document at the same time. Better connection to databases, business intelligence tools. That's what that stands for, BI tools, and programming languages. Python and R are somewhat recent additions to the platform. And they indicate here, the more connected they become and the more alternate types of code they support, it really is a powerful tool. All right, so to summarize this, basically, key skill for anybody who's in this field, right? If you're a data analyst, chances are Excel is like being used every single day. If you work with AI, chances are you're working with Excel every single day. Even if you're a programmer, there's a high likelihood that you're going to be working either with Excel every day or other tabular data formats like CSVs and JSONs and things like that. The data literacy that you walk away with just by virtue of doing this is pretty huge, and you guys might not value that initially, but you'll see that, like in our AI class tonight, we'll look at a quote from the person who said that that data is the oil of the future, right? That's the gold rush, is data. And so having data literacy becomes highly employable moving into the future. And that's why you guys are all very intelligent for being in a program like this and a course like this, right? This is where the value is. One of our top requests that we get, we have a contract division of Gateway called Business Workforce Solutions, which will partner up with private companies and provide training for their employees. And one of their biggest asks these days is to train people in data analytics. Often that involves Excel, Power BI, and Tableau, by the way. All right, final bullet there. Mastery of Excel prepares you for advanced tools like SQL. A lot of you have already done the database class and have been introduced to working with visualization tools like Power BI, and to do data analysis with Python. Because if you understand how to process data in Excel, then when you go to process it with programming code, you're even a little bit more deep into it, right? A little quote there at the bottom: spreadsheets are not just tools for calculations, they're platforms for thinking with data. And I want you to kind of like think of it in that regard. And there's, real frankly, folks, there's kind of a beauty in working with numbers and formulas and math, and you might not feel that yet, right? I certainly didn't go in with that mindset, but I always tell people that, mathematics, programming code is all just kind of a way to take very complex thoughts, break them down into little pieces, and try to show the beauty of what's there in a technical way, and Excel is really a big stepping stone in that regard. There is a PowerPoint here, and I'm going to kind of normally ask, like when we cover some of the topics in these PowerPoints, that I'm not going to go through them in class, right? So what, just so you understand, these PowerPoints come from an old Excel course that we used to teach here that explain kind of some of the mechanical aspects of working through Excel and are therefore useful. Some of it's step by step, and there's little highlights and stuff. So I do recommend that you look at those things. What I'm going to do with the PowerPoints is I'm going to extract the key points out of them, and then I'm going to just demonstrate them. I'm not going to lecture off the PowerPoints. And then ultimately what I'm going to do is I'm going to drive us towards completing the homework that we have. And there's certain things that I want to focus on. Um, you know, and I just kind of want to reiterate too, like the pattern for this course is the first half of the course, roughly the first 7 weeks, are all focused on Excel. And in those 7 weeks, we're going to, and here we are. Well, really, we're in week 3 already. We're going to learn most of what Excel is about within the next few weeks, right? And it's going to move pretty quick. And then as you move forward in this career path, this knowledge will continue to deepen. And I strongly encourage you to always continue exploring this product, right? People who know this product well tend to be pretty gainfully employed and valuable in the organizations that they work within, by the way. All right. The other thing that I did want to talk about is some of the transition that's happened here, because some of the examples I use in this course stem back to the 2016 version. And what I will reiterate is the core aspects of Excel really over the last 30 years haven't changed, like how you write a formula, how you do cell references, some of the tools that are built in have been around for all that time, right? So that's mostly the stuff we're focusing on. So really any modern version of Excel will work. And of course, if you're downloading from the gateway account that you're using, you're going to be downloading the current version they call Office 365. And truly, the reason they did that is in the past, they used to number their versions. So you would have Excel 1 and 2 and 3 and whatever. And then they were like, well, that's kind of dumb. Why don't we just say Excel 2016, and there was an Excel 2012, and there's an Excel 2021 or 2022, and now they're coming out with Excel 2026. By the way, it's just hitting the market now. But they just put the moniker of Office 365 on it. And so, I think Microsoft has the same goal for Windows, by the way, is eventually to get rid of the version number and just call it Windows, right? And who cares what version it is, just update it and just keep it running. So there are some things that did radically change kind of with I think it was the 2012 version where it really changed, where they introduced the ribbon bar. That was a really big thing. So let's talk about some of the verbiage here. And first of all, whenever you talk about a Microsoft product and we talk about the ribbon bar, I'm most specifically talking about the stuff that's up here in this area. Now, mind you, when I first launched this, I had it like this, right? Which is kind of the old-fashioned view. And which is basically you have all these menus at the top, like a regular program. And the difference is, of course, if you click on this button, it doesn't give you a drop-down menu. It gives you the ribbon bar. And you can opt right here with this little drop-down to always show the ribbon bar, or to just have it show, in the need where you're clicking on that menu item. How big and wide you make the product changes how many things appear on the ribbon bar, as you might imagine, right? So the more stuff they can fit up there, the more you can see. And notice, like, if I come out of full screen view here, that the ribbon bar starts condensing, and then they start combining things, right? And whenever you see one of these little drop downs, you can see all the stuff that relates to that particular tool. And sometimes you can also click these little icons here. Very hard to see it probably on your screen, but there's a little square with an arrow pointing out of it, and that'll bring up a different tool, basically like a more traditional old-fashioned tool. Now, you have to keep in mind here that in the days that when Excel first came out and it was only a menu-driven program, there was this whole thing about like, okay, so what menu do I go to run a filter and drop in a formula and then create a chart? And you'd have to kind of memorize what menus to go to. And now what they've done is they've kind of cross-pollinated it all. So I can be on the home tab, but it's really kind of showing me sorting and filtering tools here where normally they wouldn't be there, or summation tools, or all sorts of other things that normally I wouldn't see in the past. Some of it is context driven. So in other words, what I'm doing on the screen will drive what appears in the menu. And as you kind of leaf through all these different menu things, and you should do that, you should try to get some familiarity, right? You'll notice that there's a very, very rich set of tools here. And here's kind of like, put this in your head. No matter how many years you spend working on this product, you will never explore every single menu. There's so many menus and submenus and areas to go into. You explore the parts you need as you need them when you need them is really kind of the right way to think about it. So don't get into this mindset where you will memorize this product. It's kind of like a programming language. You're never going to memorize it. Don't just give up that thought. Not happening, right? What's important is that you know how to figure out where stuff is. They do have a very rich and robust help menu. And now that they have Copilot built in, chances are you can probably ask Copilot and say, hey, how do I blank? And it will tell you how to do that. I'm generally going to try to avoid using Copilot for a number of different reasons, but it doesn't mean that you have to. Right? If you guys find help with that, go for it. Interestingly, as they did come up with this ribbon bar, I at first very strongly rejected it, because I was so used to doing all these tasks with like keystroke commands, and navigating the menus, and I would know all the shortcuts and stuff like that. And then after a while, I got used to the ribbon bar, and I'm like, all right, I can roll with this now. And now that I know where everything is, but it took me a number of years to get used to it. So once again, it takes a while to get used to the product. Some things you will latch on to quickly, other things you might have to look up over and over again before you remember how. So don't feel bad if that's you. All right, so we got the ribbon bar and all that. We talked about cell navigation with the active cell, right? The name box, which is this box up here, that's the one that shows where your cursor's at currently. So they call that, it does have a name. And then it'll show up all the cells that you've been in recently as well, so you can navigate directly to them. There's also what we call the formula bar. The formula bar is this area here. So just to show you, notice I clicked into it. I'm just going to type some nonsense and press enter, and it captured it, right? And in this case, it was letters, but it could be numbers, right? And you notice now I'm on the spreadsheet, and it seems like I'm typing right here on the spreadsheet, right? But notice how the formula bar is mimicking it. Eventually, what we'll learn how to do is to create formulas. You'll start with an equal sign, and I'll kind of zoom in a little bit here so you guys can see what I'm doing. But you'll start with an equal sign, and then you'll type your formula. And in this case, I'll click on this formula here, or a formula cell. I'll click on cell A2. I'll put in a plus sign, and then I'll click on cell A3. And here's an example of a calculation. It's a sum, obviously, it's math. But notice that after I type it in there, what I typed in is replaced by the result of the formula or the function that I executed. But behind the scenes, and notice I click up in the formula bar, and it shows me here in a color-coded fashion which cells it's referring to. Now, I'll have you think about this. Could I not, if I did 1, 2, 3, 4, or 1, 2, 4, 3, and 2, 3, 4, couldn't I write a formula here where I say, well, can I add 1, 2, 4, 3 plus 2, 3, 4, and it still gives me the right answer. But the difference is, if this value changes, this formula updates automatically, whereas if this one changes, that one does not. Why? Because the numbers are hard coded. And that little micro demo I just did there is really kind of one of the keys to Excel. The key to Excel is sometimes data is hard coded, and then sometimes we refer to that data directly. And it's the references to information that make Excel powerful. Truly. right? That's really kind of the grand mastery of the product. Um, all right, worksheets. We talked about that already. So you can have multiple tabs. Tabs can be named, so you can like right click them, rename it, and call it, whatever you want, right? You can take a tab and duplicate it if you wish, so you can move or copy it around. And I often will do this thing here where I create a copy, then I can tell it where to go, and then you can see there's the copy. And if you wish, you can grab a tab and move it around. So you see the little arrow that appears above. So if I don't want that tab there, I can move it, right? So those are ways to add tabs. You can also do a right click and insert or delete tabs if you wish, right? Rename them or whatever, or just use the plus mark to add more sheets. And Armando, I don't know if you still have the search up, but how many tabs can we have? All right, some navigation shortcuts. I gave him the challenge and he's on it. I can tell he's like typing in, he's letting his AI search figure it out. Right. This is the power of the collective brain, folks. All right. So navigation shortcuts. All right. So some real basic ones, and I want you to look at some of these here, and maybe I should have like put them all on a separate line. But the enter key, the tab key, arrow keys, and a couple of the others are pretty important. So if I'm on a spreadsheet, if I use my arrow keys, this is my down key, my right key, my left key, my up key. So the arrow keys on your keyboard help you navigate. If I'm typing information into a spreadsheet, so like people who do a lot of data entry on spreadsheets often will, type something and then press enter. Notice what happens when I press enter, right? I type something, press enter, type something, enter, type something, enter. Numbers, words, doesn't matter. But when I press enter, whatever I have in the cell will lock in, it'll be stored there, and it moves me down the line. Another way to do it, right? Because often what we're doing in a spreadsheet is maybe we'll have column headers like name, address, maybe email or something like that, right? And so those might be column headers. And then I'm typing, a name. And instead of pressing enter, you can press the tab key. And notice what the tab key does is it moves you over to the right, keeps you in the same row. And I don't know, something like that. Now you notice the data is not fitting in there very elegantly. So it is possible to resize your columns. And if you double click a column header, it will resize. And I should correct that, not the column header, but the divider at the right edge of your column. It will resize the column to the largest content automatically. Interestingly, I can also resize all the columns at once, right? You notice that all of them are the same size, and I can also auto size them all automatically. And notice how I did that is I clicked on this little box up here, which is not a column header or a row header, but is kind of like, I don't know what they call this control, kind of like the table control, but it highlights all the rows and columns. Otherwise, notice whenever I'm in a cell that the column and the row indicators are highlighted so I know where I'm sitting. I can always look at the name box too. Real frankly, I rarely do that, but you might, right? And then if I select the column, notice how it changes colors. And yes, you can select a whole row or a whole column. Or you can drag around something and select it. Another way to do it, by the way, is you can hold down your shift key and like down arrow and right arrow and select multiple cells at the same time. Right, so these are really basic navigation skills. Some of the other ones that they're pointing out here, which are kind of interesting, shift tab moves one column to the left, tab moves you to the right. So for example, if I'm sitting here, I'm tabbing. Now I'm shift tabbing going backwards, right? Same thing with, okay, control home, right? So if I do control home, watch what that does. Hold down your control key and the home button on your keyboard. I also have to press a function key on mine. Takes you to the top leftmost cell. If I do control end, it takes me to the bottom left or rightmost piece of data on the spreadsheet. Not to the bottom of the spreadsheet, but the bottom, like the last piece of data on the spreadsheet. So if you have a really large spreadsheet, you want to go to the end of it, control end. You want to go to the beginning of it, control home, right? So those are very, very useful keys for sure. All right. Some other interesting aspects here, and I think we're about due for a break here. Why don't we take a 5-minute break, and we'll come back and we'll talk about some of these topics here. So 5 minutes, it's 6:36. Let's come back at about 6:41. Let's see you guys then. All right, the next little topic that they're throwing in here is the fact that if you type in numbers and you type in text, they automatically align in a cell differently. And I'll bring up the spreadsheet program here. You can already see an example of this. So I have like some weird pieces of information. Like for example, these are words, right? And you notice, the words all left aligned. And then if I type in numbers, whether they're decimal point numbers or whatever, they all right align, and that's the normal way that Excel operates. Now if you don't like that, you can always change the alignment. So I can take this number and left align it if I wish, but that is not the default. Keep in mind some common keystroke commands when you're using well, just about any application. Probably one of the first ones that you want to memorize is Control Z, right? What is Control Z? Undo, right? Undo is our friend for sure whenever you're using any software application. So in an Excel, you might do something very complicated. And, oh my God, I just broke everything. No, don't worry about it. Control Z, and you start stepping backwards through every action you've taken. Now watch what I do here. I went with Control Z, Control Z, Control Z, Control Z. See, it's just undoing my stuff. But you know what? There's an anti-Control Z, which is called Control Y, which repeats your steps as far as you've taken them. So Control Z, undo, Control Y, redo. The other ones that you want to get comfortable with are cut, copy, paste, right? So Control X, Control C, and Control V. And I know you guys probably know those. But there's also Control S. What does that do? Save. What about Control A? Watch what happens in the spreadsheet. It takes all the information that's together and it selects everything, basically. Control A is select everything. There's a few others that you use that are keyboard related. Control P to print and a couple of other things like that. But Control Z, Control Y, Control X, Control C, Control V, Control S, Control A are the ones you're probably going to use the most. All right, so just memorize those probably. Those are pretty common ones. All right, let's move on then to this idea. Like if you put in a bunch of information, that it can truncate it. So here's an example, because I might have some information here, and then I come into this cell and I type a bunch, right? Notice what happens. It's not that it's not there, it's there, but it doesn't show because the space doesn't show. So it does get truncated. And I can make the cell bigger, or if I put this in a cell that doesn't have something off to the right, it will show. So these are kind of like weird little quirks. I also don't know if you guys noticed this, but when I was typing in these numbers here before, I typed 2.30, and then when I pressed enter, it got rid of the 0. That's kind of weird. What if I did 2.000001? Well, that it holds on to, right? So There's a bunch of trailing zeros that will typically get rid of those. Sometimes when your numbers get really, really large, it will also switch to exponential notation. So don't worry about that until we get to it. Um, but those are the basic entry types there. Um, all right. There are these like formatting tools that are kind of built in. And one thing that I will talk about here, some basic ones that people use are the ones that you see indicated there. And this little panel here is the one that they're referring to for the formatting. So I just want to show you, for example, if this number here was money, I can just click the formatting command for money. Notice what it did. It added commas, a dollar sign, a period, and two decimal places to put it into numeric format. I'm going to Control Z that. I can also turn it into a percentage. So here's the number 12, and I can hit percentage. So number 12 is equivalent to 12,000 or 1,200%. Is that right? That is right. Because remember, a percentage goes from 0 to 1. So the number 12 is 1,200%. Another thing that you can do is if you have a large numbers, you can do the comma thing where it just does the commas without the dollar sign, right? So that might be something that's helpful for you or not. And that's very, very subjective. And then what you'll notice here with all these like presets, some of these, like for example, these two little things here to increase the number of decimals or increase the number of decimals. So I'm going to increase it first, but I can also decrease it. So you can kind of control it and what appears. Interestingly, if you do a number like this one where I'm going to decrease it, okay, well, 0.00001 is not very significant. But what if I had a number like 3.789 or something like that, and I start decreasing the number of decimals? I want you to notice that it does round as you're decreasing, right? That second position 8 turns to a 9 because that's what it would round up to. So anything from 5 or above is going to round up. Anything below is going to round down, right? But that's only visually. In truth, the whole number is still sitting in the cell. So that's a pretty important takeaway as well. So you can play with those formatting and style commands. And in fact, if you kind of get into these, you'll notice that they have a bunch of presets that they have, so for currency, numbers, or whatever. Notice that they have some for dates, percentages, fractions, scientific notation, etc. And then they have many, many more. And you can also customize them if you wish. So you can control what the stuff looks like on the spreadsheet. This is usually more important for number formats, especially if you're doing math with it, that usually want to maintain the numerical integrity of the data, but not necessarily like the way that it looks on the screen. So sometimes if something's got like 50 decimal places, it might be better to show less on the screen. Like, who cares about the other decimal places? Well, maybe a scientist would, but maybe an accountant might not, right? Because they're only worried about 2 decimal places typically. All right. A couple little things here, right? There's spell check built in. There's this command called merge and center. So I'm just going to show you how that works. Like if I wanted to take, let's say, I don't know, let's say I do a name column and then I do Joe and Smith or something like that. So it's got a first name, last name, and the column header doesn't quite match up. I can highlight this cell here and do what they call a merge and center command, which is this weird little icon here. And what it does is it takes that one or those 2 cells and converts it into one and centers the content that's found in the first cell, right? You notice how if you look really closely at it now too, the cell divider in the middle went away. I want you to notice that this is still thought of as E6, not F6, right? Usually we do this for making things look nice, and you can flip it back and forth. Just be mindful of the fact that if you put data here, right, that data will get destroyed. Remember, there is Control Z though, so you can always step backwards, through the material and do that. There is kind of like these autofill and flash fill things, and I'll give you an example of what they mean by this. So, for example, if I type the number 1, 2, 3, 4, all right, and let's say I want to make a list of numbers up to 20, right? I could just type them all in, or I can highlight the pattern I want, and then I can grab this little corner here, and you notice what it's doing? It's auto adding the values for me. Isn't that slick? Right. And when you see like some of these things, and what's neat about this trick, by the way, is that you can use it on things other than numbers, right? Most often we'll use it on numbers. But if I had a set of dates, let's say today is the 26th of January, and tomorrow is the 27th of January, I can highlight that pattern, and then, yeah, it'll just keep incrementing things. So I think that's a really particularly cool feature. Also, if you have something you type, right? And then let me put in some weirder words like, I don't know. And notice, because I have this pattern going of these words, if I type the letter H now, it's going to auto suggest heat because that's above it in the list. So, like, for example, if I have like a yes, a no, and a maybe, and then I start typing an M, it's going to recommend maybe. And if I type a Y, it's going to recommend yes. And it's not accidental where it's coming from. It's looking up above, going, oh, you've been typing that a lot. Here it is, by just typing one letter. If I break the pattern and start typing here, notice the autocomplete stops. But if I do it here, oh yeah, it doesn't like it there either. I guess I broke the pattern. All right, so that's what happens there. Let's turn our attentions now to talking about one of the things that Excel does really well, which is math, right? You know, the basic functions of mathematics in terms of the symbols that we use for arithmetic are the ones that we normally use in programming. And I'm looking at most of the people here in the room, and either you guys have already had your Python class, or you're in the process of taking it, or maybe you've had a Java class or some other class where you learn how to code. And you'll notice that the mathematical symbols that we use here are the same ones we use in programming, with one exception, right? Or two exceptions, actually. Addition, subtraction, those are kind of a no-brainer. Multiplication on computers is done with the asterisk key. Division is done with the forward slash. That's the key that has the question mark on it. The percent sign in programming, what do we use that for in programming? Well, we use that for modulus, right? Which is remainder division. So we're looking for just a remainder. But in Excel, it's actually a percent sign. Remember, percent usually is in the range of 0 to 1. And anything that exceeds the number 1 will be larger than 100%. I'm always cautious about doing math with percent signs, though. I typically like to defer to using the decimal representation of the percent sign as opposed to actually doing a percent. The percent usually is more of a visual thing, but it can be used as a mathematical operator as well. There's also a way to express exponents in Excel. So you use the caret symbol, which is the shift of the number 6 key. And so if I wanted to take, let's say, 2 to the 4th power, I could do that by just going 2 caret 4. and then that would do that calculation. I would say that these are more rare circumstances, but these you will use a lot, the regular mathematical operators. There's some basic functions that we use as well, and I'm going to demonstrate all of these in just a moment, just so you guys are aware. One of the more basic ones is sum. Now, of course, sum is the equivalent of adding a bunch of things together. But if you're doing a whole column of numbers, the last thing you want to do is what I was doing before, which is click on a cell, type plus, click on a cell, type plus, and do it for like 50 numbers. That's very cumbersome. Where a sum function, I can just put at the bottom of a list of numbers, type in equals sum, declare the range, and boom, it'll give me the total. There is an auto sum button too. We'll look at that. And then there's also ways to very quickly do average, to count, and get a min or a max as well. And then ultimately we'll look at the insert function that allows people to basically find the function that they're looking for if they're not sure which one it is. You do get to memorize certain ones, but once again, Excel is kind of like a programming language. You don't remember every function, you remember how to look it up. And I'll demonstrate all of those. So I'm going to go ahead now and jump back over to the spreadsheet. And I'm going to go to one of the other tabs here. And I'm just going to kind of type in a series of numbers here. And if you guys are recognizing, I'm doing a pattern of sorts. And now I'm going the other direction. But here's a whole list of numbers. And if I wanted to come up with a sum for these numbers, there's a few different ways to do it, right? Let's say here's my list of numbers and I want to get a total for them. One of the easiest ways to do it, real frankly, is just to hit the auto sum button. So if I hit the auto sum, notice what it did. It typed the sum formula for me. And then inside of set of parentheses, it's declaring a range of values. It says from H2 colon H14. So from H2 through H14, all I have to do to calculate that is press enter, and that's correct. Right. So it does that for me. I think that's really cool and very, very simple, because let's think about it. Most of the time, that's the math we're going to do. We got a list of numbers, we want to get a total. So the auto sum works pretty darn well. But what if I wanted to put that formula together manually? Well, then I'm just copying the numbers over, by the way. I can do that by just typing it. So I can hit equals sum, and notice how it gives me a whole list of functions that have the word sum in it. Sum is just one of many different types of sums that you can do. Then you put in a parenthesis, and then it tries to give you a clue, and it says number 1, comma, number 2, comma. So I could do this. I could do J2, comma, J3, comma, right, J4, etc. Right, close the parentheses, and I have the total for the first 3. Or I can come in here, put in the sum function, and then literally drag a selection around what I want summed, release, close the parenthesis, and where my cursor is right now is up here in this window in the formula bar. Close the parenthesis and press enter. I do want you to notice though that when I'm on this cell where the formula is, if I click into the formula bar and provided the columns wide enough, it'll show me the formula in the cell if I click up in the formula bar. So that way I can go in and I can manually tweak it if, let's say, I need to get more numbers. But a sum is a really common one to use. So one that you want to get familiar with. I want you to look at the breakdown of a basic formula. A formula always starts with an equal sign. Then if it's using a function, which sum is a function, we put in the name of the function followed by a set of parentheses and then whatever information the function needs to execute. And in this case, it's a range of number or cells, a list of numbers or cells, or whatever references that you put in. So I think that's pretty helpful. Here's another really weird feature of Excel. And once again, I'm just going to copy some of these numbers and I'm just going to move them over here. But notice how these are all highlighted right now. In the bottom right corner of Excel, do you guys notice that Excel automatically sums any numbers that I highlight? So these are highlighted. It's telling me that the sum is 501. It's telling me that there's 9 numbers. It's also giving me the average right here. And I didn't have to do that. Excel automatically calculates those things. And so when they were referring to how it automatically calculates those, so Excel is always looking at your numbers. And just by highlighting, will give you the sum, the count, and the average. Very, very useful features, by the way. Very, very useful features. If I want to leverage the formulas, there are functions that are built to do this, right? But knowing that, okay, I'm typing a bunch of numbers. How many do I have so far? Oh, I got 9, right? That's super helpful. Or what's my total so far? 501, right? If I was playing like Rummy or something, I'd reach my limit, right? So those are really, really helpful little automatic features that happen. Notice that if I highlight all of these numbers, that it gives me the same answer here that I get there. And then think about it. If you have a sum, you divide by the number of values that you have. That's how they get the average. And I could manually write those formulas. So for example, I could take the sum of this range of numbers, right? And then I could divide that by the count of those numbers. I don't know how many numbers that is. Does anybody remember how many numbers that was? I think it was 13, right? Or I could put in the count function and then it will give me the average for it, right? So, I mean, you can develop the formula on your own, or you can use the built-in formula, which is probably better. So if I use the average, right? Oops, and I never finished the formula there. Average. And then I give it the range and close it, you'll notice how the numbers are identical to what I just calculated. Right. So there's often more than one way to do things. And I mean, when you think about working with Excel, the one real big takeaway that I always tell people is when you can avoid hard coding numbers into your functions, that's really what you prefer. Here, I'm using, excuse me, kind of breaking things here. I'm just using this average function. Nothing's hard coded into it. So if I come up here and change a value, oops, once again, I got to be up here and change a value, notice how the numbers update automatically. That's one of the powers of Excel. Yeah, very, very much so. Okay, moving along here, we don't have a super huge amount of time left. And one of the things that I'm going to talk about the remainder of this material, and then I'm going to teach you how to do a little bit of formatting and highlighting, and then I'm going to leave you on your own to do the homework. And what we're going to do with the homework is next week when we get together, we will review how to do it correctly, right? And I know most of you will probably figure that out without too much problem, but those LinkedIn learning videos will help you as well. So let's talk a little bit kind of like what's happened in the last, let's call it 10 years of Excel. The collaboration tools have been added and co-authoring. So multiple people working on the same spreadsheet at the same time. Believe it or not, I know that you guys know this about Microsoft Word. Microsoft Word will auto save your work. Like you type something and it will automatically save. So if you forget to save, you don't lose anything. Believe it or not, Excel up until recently did not do that automatically. You would have to remember to save your work. They now do have an auto save built in. We also have a sharing button, which we talked about real briefly. That's not a huge part of what we do in this class, but it's just good to know that it's there. There are new functions that are coming into play in Office 365. The X lookup is coming into play now, replacing VLOOKUP and HLOOKUP, although we'll focus mostly on VLOOKUP and HLOOKUP because those are kind of classic. Um, there's data types that we can pull in from the internet and other various data sources, much more powerful than it used to be. There's better ways to analyze data. It also has some of these AI tools and suggestions built in. So, like if you're trying to create a chart or a graph, for example, it might suggest a type of graph, and a lot of times it's right that is the right one for that data. A lot of new chart types. There's also the ability to throw in 3D models and SVG graphics if you wish. And they've done some things under the hood that makes the product work better, supposedly with larger files. So we'll see if that's true or not. The tools for importing and transforming data have improved significantly. Um, Text and CSV files, real big data source for most of these platforms. XML files and JSON are also supported. We can directly connect to databases and cloud databases. We can pull things in from Power BI and vice versa. And then we have all sorts of other things, including the ability these days to like find web content and scrape it off of a web page. That's possible too with Excel these days. All right. What I'd like to do for the last portion of class here, if you guys don't mind, is to talk a little bit about formatting and trying to make things kind of look sort of nice when you're working with information. So I'm going to just kind of do a really rudimentary spreadsheet build here. It's going to be a combination of trying to make it look nice, put in meaningful information, and then do some basic calculations. And these are the skills you're going to kind of basically leverage a little bit to do your homework for this unit. So I'm going to start by thinking I might make a list of maybe customers and sales figures. That sounds pretty good. So maybe I might have a column called customer name, right? Okay, well that's too big for the cell. So I'm going to double click the column header here to expand it. And then I'm thinking maybe the date of the sale would be important, and maybe the amount of the sale would be important. Right. Now, those are kind of going to be header information. So I'm going to highlight all three of those. So I'm going to hold down my shift key, a right arrow, and then I'm going to do a control B for bold, right? Or I can go up here and click bold. And then I also like to put borders underneath things. So I'm going to hit my border button here, but you can, with the one that was set already was a bottom border. So that's what I went with. So if I click off of it, you can see the bottom border, right? Kind of looks okay. Maybe I want to make it look a little bit fancier, and maybe I'll do a top and bottom border, right? And then maybe up here, I want to put like a title or something like sales figures for fall of 2025, something like that. And I want that to be a header, So I'm going to take these cells here, I'm going to highlight them all. I'm going to do a merge and center, and then let's make it bigger. I don't know about bold, but I could do a background color, maybe make it look a little nicer. So you see what I just did there to make it look good. And colors that be really careful with using colors on stuff like this. Avoid strong colors is a polite way to say it. So I'm gonna just like throw in some imaginary data here. And then I'm going to come up with a couple of different I'm struggling to come up with really generic names here for people. trying to avoid typing all the same numbers over and over again. Right. And you can carry on this process and put in a bunch of data. All right. The one thing that I noticed right off the bat is, well, okay, this looks okay. I guess that's all right. Well, these are dollar amounts, right? Maybe I should format it like money. Maybe that looks better. You might not opt to do that. Maybe you want that to be with the total. So you might do a thing like this. I might put in another bottom border here. And then I might have right here, a thing that says total. I might make that bold. I might even write justify it. And then right here, I can place my total. And there's a few different ways I can do that. Probably the easiest is to do an auto sum, but I think it pays to practice your formulas a little bit. So equals sum, open parenthesis, click and drag, release, close your parenthesis, and press enter. And then that one might make sense to format like money. Right. So this is the kind of stuff you're going to do. Now, sometimes we'll have, more, products that people are ordering, and maybe you'll add some columns. So just for example, maybe I'll insert a column, and I want you to notice how I'm doing that. I'm right clicking on the column header, and then I'm choosing the insert command. And I might do something like quantity, QTY, right? So maybe there were 2 of those ordered. Oh, and notice what happened, that's got a date format on it. Notice how I know that, because I look up here and I see that the number format set to date. I do not want it for date. I want it to be, let's go to general. Yeah, I typed the number 2, so that's good. This person ordered 3 of those. Oh, same thing. So really this format of general really should apply to all of these. So let's set it to general. And then this one we'll leave at 1. And maybe I'll add a subtotal column here, right? And then I want to show you this cool little tool here where if I like the format of this, I can click the format painter and click here, and notice what it did. It gave me the over and underlines, right? And then I'll do the same thing here, format painter there. And then maybe this, I can merge and center across all of those. But notice I have to unmerge it and then remerge it like so. Now the subtotal is going to be a multiplication of this amount and that amount. And I can just do that with an equal sign. And I can multiply 2 times this cell, press enter, right? And then I want you to notice a really cool little trick here. If I copy this cell, so I can like Control C copy and paste it here. Is that correct? Yeah, it is. And I think this is really a neat thing about spreadsheets, especially if you've never used one before. I typed a formula here that applied to this information. And if you look in there, C3 times D3, C3 times D3, and it gave me that. Now, if I look at this formula and I copied it from here, notice that the numbers automatically incremented. So I moved down 1 cell, it took the same formula, but put it in the different row. It automatically recognized I should move it down 1 line. I think that's pretty fascinating that it does that automatically. Now I'm going to move down to the next cell, and I did the same thing here. So C5 times D5. Right. Now I'm going to delete these. And what I can also do is if the formula is correct here, I can click this little square icon, click and drag, and notice it'll also pull the formula down to the cell below. This gives me a sum of D3 through D5. So could I, that's not really correct anymore. Can I move that over here and copy paste it? I sure can. Oops, what's that all about? Well, it doesn't fit in the space that's there. So I'm going to double click that little divider. And now I have the sum for those. So that's correct. This sum doesn't need to be there, so I could delete that. And then I can move my total box over. And here's one of those things that you guys will learn. Now I could cut and paste. That's one approach, right? That I could do. Oops. And notice I'm control Ying myself back. Or I can actually highlight a cell and then click and drag it over to move it. But I have to click on the frame of the highlight to do that. I notice my bottom border went away here, right? And folks, this is just an example of getting all the stuff, basic skills that you're going to need to do the spreadsheets for the homework. I know I have at least one person that already completed the Unit 2 stuff, and that's just fine. The way that you guys are going to work on this homework is as follows, and I'm going to kind of show you how to get in there. Click on the assignment title. When you get to this view of the page, you'll notice that there's a spreadsheet that's a starter spreadsheet that you'll download, and then you'll just open inside of Excel, right? And here it comes. And then your job, homework wise, is to try to make this look like this, right? And there's some extrapolations that you have to make here. So you're going to have to do some math and do your best to try to get the formulas in there. Try to make it look nice. So you notice how there's a banner and some things are bold and how some things are formatted with commas, for example. And then we have a separate table down here that's a calculation of percentages. And I want you to try these on your own, by the way. And then next week when we get together, we'll start out class by going through the solutions. Right. So I won't leave you high and dry. You will see how to do them. These aren't particularly difficult. I would ask that you first watch all the LinkedIn videos because they demonstrate how to do these procedures. And then maybe review this video to see how I did the little spreadsheet I just did and make your best attempt at it. Then after, you do the work, we will take a look, show you the correct way to do it. And then you can also make tweaks to your work and resubmit it if necessary. Whenever you're pulling a spreadsheet down from the internet, right, like the one I just downloaded off of Brightspace, you will get this little warning here that says, hey, it came from the internet. There can be programming code attached to this, which can be harmful. And you won't be able to do any edits on this until you hit that enable editing button. All right. So folks, that will do a wrap of all the material. So I'm going to end the video here.